Growth Pod is brought to you by Genero, a leading growth agency in the Nordics. We interview marketing experts, business leaders, and entrepreneurs to uncover the stories and strategies behind profitable growth.
Today I'm joined by Edward Ford, Demand Gen Director at Supermetrics. Supermetrics is a SaaS company that helps hundreds of thousands of customers around the world better understand their marketing data. The company was founded in Finland in 2013 and has rapidly grown to over 50 million in annual recurring revenue. Welcome to the show, Edward.
Thanks, Joshua, so much for having me.
You joined Supermetrics in 2019, and the marketing team was very different, much smaller than it is now, obviously, and Supermetrics as a company was much smaller. How did this come about, and what made you want to join Supermetrics?
Yeah, it was a very different company back then, for sure, a lot smaller. And at that time, I had been working at a marketing agency here in Helsinki, specialized in working with tech and SaaS companies on basically growing their marketing. And I had previously been working in marketing and in tech, and this was my first entrance into the world of SaaS. And I just loved it, loved to work with all our different clients and customers, loved growing the agency business. We had a great team. I think that was my school of marketing. I would actually recommend all marketers to go and work in an agency at some point. Great way to accelerate your learning. And I was there for 2.5, 3 years. And, I had the chance to work with a lot of different SaaS companies from here in Finland and the Nordics, across Europe, and also in North America as well. And I always thought, what could we do if we spent all our time focusing on just one of our customers? So obviously we were working with several customers, and I sort of had that buzz to go and join a SaaS company and get the chance to experience things from the other side of the table, and to be in-house and have the opportunity to go and figure things out with the sales team, with the product team. I think as an agency, there's also a limit in terms of the influence you have internally. And so we were obviously working with the marketing teams, in some cases, CEO, founder, if they were a little bit smaller. But to really get inside a SaaS company and see what it was like to grow on, for me, that was the next step that I wanted to make. And I had heard of Supermetrics. I actually thought they were an American company. I had no idea they were based here in Helsinki, and their office was like right by the main railway station. I had been in contact with some members of the very early stage team members who are still there as well. There's still some of the original core group still in the company, and they were talking about expanding the team and the marketing team. And I've been chatting with them on and off for maybe 6 months. And the more I got to know the company and the people and the business results, the more interested I was. I couldn't believe the numbers when I saw them. They're this small company growing revenue rapidly, but also highly profitable. And at that time, that was quite unique, because this was really the era of growth at all costs, raise huge amounts of VC funding, get your 2-year runway, pump loads of money into hires. And obviously that, to me, sounded a little risky. And, now we're in a situation where we kind of see some of the downsides of that approach. Whereas Supermetrics, because of the approach we took, now we're in still a very healthy situation, even though the market is challenging. So I kind of saw that when I was looking into the company back in 2018, so over 5 years ago now. So I think those were some of the things that drew me in, and just to be part of a small team then, but also see it grow. And I felt there's huge potential. So to kind of be part of this growth journey from the very early days, it's the opportunity that doesn't come along very often. So I had to jump at it.
Absolutely. That's interesting that you mentioned that, from the very beginning or throughout the company's journey history, you've always been very mindful of spending, if I understood you correctly, and not just going for this reckless growth at all cost. Was that something, how has that kind of influenced how you've thought about marketing and media channels and everything? Do you have that? Has that always been kind of a constraint that, we need to be very careful about how we spend, and we need to keep profitability in mind?
Yeah, I think we've always focused on profitability. I think Mikael, the founder, that's something, that he thinks is a basic part of business. You need to be profitable and you need to grow. And that aligns with my own views of business as well. And so we've always focused on EBITDA and maybe in recent years, kind of before the downturn, maybe we were willing to sacrifice a little bit on that and focus on growth. But we've always looked at a number that we want to hit. And in the marketing team, one of our OKRs is always on LTV CAC ratio, so on efficiency, even, before the last year or so. So it's always been part of the culture, not just within the marketing team, but I would say wider across the company as well.
Got it. As I mentioned in the intro, your title is Demand Gen Director. I don't think there's anyone who works in B2B marketing who hasn't heard about demand generation. I think it became popular, or at least more popular in the last couple of years. Could you explain, how do you think about what is demand generation? Do we need a new term? Is it something new, or is it something that's always been done? How do you think about it?
It's a tricky one. I know some people love it, some people hate the term. Even though it's my title, I'm still a little 50-50, to be honest. I think in a way we've always been generating demand. As a marketer, that's your job. And I think it doesn't just hold to marketing. It's the job of everyone in the company to create demand through product, through sales, through great customer experiences, through support, through customer success, and so forth, if you think about all the different functions. So in a way, I think everybody is generating demand for the business. But I think what happened in terms of the marketing space is that, in my view, demand gen was offered up as an alternative to lead gen. So you shouldn't be generating leads, you should be generating demand. This is where the shift has happened, because I think if you go back 10 years ago when there was this big switch from outbound to inbound, a big part of the original inbound playbook was on generating leads through a conversion point. Normally it was a content offer, whether it was an ebook, a white paper, a webinar, and then you would nurture people through the funnel, and eventually people would buy. So they're trying to sort of simplify the complex B2B buying journey. And I think it was a good first step in terms of helping people understand how we should be thinking about marketing. It's about giving, it's about creating value, it's about meeting the buyer where they are, it's about helping your ideal customers be better in their job. But then we kind of got sucked down this lead gen black hole where you would just basically spin up a 15-page flaky ebook, you'd run a bunch of paid ads to a landing page, you generate a bunch of signups, which were relatively low cost, and then you would stamp MQL on it, ship it to sales, and then surprisingly, only 1% might even end up having a call with your sales team because people were interested in the content and they weren't necessarily interested in what you had to offer. So kind of figuring out the way to make that process more effective and more efficient was like a big part of what marketers then focused on. And this, in my opinion, has led to a shift from, well, don't think about lead gen, it's all about demand gen. And there's a lot of companies out there talking about this shift. And I don't, maybe I was in a little bit of a SaaS bubble because I think we never really fell into this playbook. And one of the things about product-led growth and Supermetrics in particular is that we got to 5 million in annual recurring revenue without a single sales team member. There was no one in sales. So it was all self-serve. It was in a way B2B e-commerce. So you're working with the product team and you're getting people to basically buy directly through your website. So you start a trial, you get to know the product, and then you choose to buy or not. I mean, other companies might go through a freemium where you can then use the basic version. And then eventually, if you get so frustrated you want to unlock some core features, then you go paid. So I think Canva is a great example of a company that's really nailed and evolved the freemium model. So yeah, I think in a way this is the history of where this discussion has come, and I think that we've always been doing it, but maybe the way in which we do it is a little different. So yeah, I think that's my take on how we got here today.
I really like that kind of historical explanation. That makes a lot of sense. Two other terms that are quite often associated with that would be demand creation, demand capture. And one thing that I feel has been true, especially in the last couple of years when the macro environment has been very good. There's been a lot of money sloshing around. There's been a lot of money going to advertising, and demand has generally been rising, is that a lot of what we can have thought of as marketing has actually just been demand capture. What do you think about that? And how do you at Supermetrics distinguish between demand capture and demand generation in terms of, the channels, but also how you measure and even think about these things? Because I feel like people so often get confused.
Yeah. I think for me, this is another viewpoint that not everyone agrees with. I'm taking a course at the moment on social selling and buying psychology. And this came up last night on a webinar, and it actually changed my view as well, because I quite like the view that demand gen is a combination of demand creation plus demand capture. But then someone was sort of challenging that, and I'll get into it in a minute. But I think I always struggle with the marketing funnel. I somehow found it a little bit complex. I thought it was maybe a little bit too simple of a model, and I do like simplification. I like frameworks, but I think to me it almost made things too simple, and you thought about things in the wrong way, because the buying journey isn't linear. It's not really a funnel. It's very messy. It's all over the place. And I like the thinking that if you take everyone who could potentially get value from your product, so your total addressable market, only a small fraction of that audience is in a buying cycle. They're looking for a solution. So people often say roughly around 5%, whereas the rest of the potential customer base are not, but you need to market to them. So there you should be creating demand to the 95%, and you should be capturing demand to the 5%. And this was a great way for me to really think about how we should be approaching our marketing. And I think what happens, as you said, is that a lot of marketers will default to demand capture. And I think a lot of companies that have CFOs or they have budgets in place is that you struggle to get budget for things like demand creation, because demand capture is search ads on Google, it's bottom of funnel investments, it's bidding on your brand term, it's bidding on like high intent terms where you know that there could be an opportunity to convert. And really what you're doing is that all your marketing is focusing on just converting that 5% of in-market buyers, which I think is a very good place to start, because you need to build that efficient bottom of funnel workflow. You need alignment with sales if you have a sales-led motion. You need alignment with product if you have more of a self-serve PLG motion. And I think as well, I've started hearing people talk more about demand conversion. So you create demand, you capture demand, and you convert demand, which is maybe the very last step of the sales process. And to me, it's also it's essentially just a way of reframing the sort of awareness, consideration, decision steps of the buying journey. And I think the course I was on last night, they were referencing Eugene Schwartz's Breakthrough Advertising book, which is one of the OG books on marketing, where he kind of spoke about the levels of people in terms of buying, in that you have unaware, problem aware, solution aware, product aware, and then most aware. And I think demand creation is really just bringing the unaware, problem aware, and solution aware stages together, and then the demand capture is product aware, most aware. So I think in a way, everything is still the same. It's just been presented in a different format. But for me, I found that framework quite useful to think about how we should be doing marketing and running advertising. And it's tricky because I think, 95% of the market are maybe in that demand creation stage and 5% are in demand capture. But I would be willing to bet that most marketing budgets are flipped the other way. You probably are putting 95% into demand capture and 5% into demand creation, because it's easy to measure. You can more confidently say, if we invest X amount of dollars in this campaign, we could get Y dollars back based on, looking at AdWord costs and so forth. Whereas the demand creation part, it's much more complex and it's harder to build a business case around. So yeah, I think those are some of the things that I kind of think about around this.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So how do you, without going necessarily into exact details, but how do you and how have you built that business case at Supermetrics? Because I do find that is that's the bottleneck, is that marketers, CMOs really struggle to convince the rest of the company that, hey, these investments are really going to pay off. We should be doing these things. And it's so easy to default, or for CFO, board, whoever it is, say, hey, we're spending on Google and we're getting X, ROAS. Why don't we just keep spending on that? And the marketer's trying to explain that, no, that's the current demand that we're just capturing. We need to go and create new demand, but they can't make that business case. So how do you think about that? Yeah,
I think that's a good way to go about it. I think firstly, you really need to get the demand capture piece working quite efficiently, and you have good alignment, good hands-off. You can show that you can bring business in. But then I think as well, when you're forecasting, you need to build a scenario where if we only invest in bottom of funnel demand capture, here's what's going to happen. And typically what happens is that you reach a point where the amount of money you need to put in to make one extra sale becomes higher and higher, and eventually you kind of run out of demand to capture. This all comes back to product market fit of the space you're in, the product you built. I think at Supermetrics, when I joined, there was actually a lot of demand to capture. It was a problem a lot of people had, which is basically moving marketing data from all your different platforms into different reporting analytics tools, dashboards, data warehouses, and so forth. It was a big problem. A lot of people had the problem. Almost any marketer, any company that had a marketing team had this problem. And we were one of the first to solve it. So there was a lot of bottom of funnel demand to capture. But over time, when you see a lot of external factors come in, you have challenger brands, companies that kind of come in at the low end and try to bottom out and compete on price. You have other companies, like your competitors are obviously innovating on the product side. You have, things like a pandemic, which can either drive demand or reduce demand. So for Zoom, for example, I don't think the marketing team really did anything. But when everyone started working from home, there was more demand to capture. Now in an economic downturn, less demand to capture. So you see your marketing becomes less efficient in terms of the amount of money you need to spend to generate one sale. And then you reach a point where your CAC LTV and your payback period just doesn't make sense. The math don't work. So you need to build a case like, we also need to be nurturing and reaching next month's audience, next quarter's audience. And you build a business case around that and show that you need to balance between long-term demand creation and shorter-term demand capture. And really, this is down to the CMO-CFO relationship in particular. And the only way CMO can have that discussion is firstly through building trust by showing, I really know what I'm talking about. I know the numbers inside out, because CFOs deal in the language of numbers. And a big part of that is data. So, we've been speaking to a lot of our customers, and one of the key challenges they have, particularly on the sort of senior level, is that, we need to use data to be able to speak to our CFO, to show what's happening and to show what we should be doing. Because a lot of companies have been using marketing data as almost like a rear view mirror. It's like, well, this is what happened in the past. And, we did this last month and here we can see the results. Whereas you should be looking at this, we forecast we should be doing these, or I believe our next best action is this, and here's where we should be investing. And this is where you have those conversations. It's not easy, but it really comes down. It's a key part of any modern marketing leader's skill set, really. I think those would be some of the key things I'd advise people on in terms of building that business case.
That's really good advice, especially I think talking about that relationship. And I think that there are psychological barriers, like just the anchoring effect, for instance. When you got used to having a certain CAC or ROAS on bottom of the funnel, it feels so horrible to accept something way, way less when you're thinking about top of funnel. Interesting point that you mentioned data, because I think one thing I've seen in a lot of companies is their marketing spend and measuring and everything is not at the level, but they can have their own data to justify demand generation spend. But there's a lot of data out there to show how the effects of advertising, right? Bud and Sharp and those guys have done a lot of data to show that, research to show that advertising is a very broad, long-term effects. And so I feel like CMOs should leverage that kind of data a lot, because they may not have their own internal data to show why something should, to justify investments, but there's a lot of external data out there. Okay, let's talk about some specific campaigns and activities. Recently, you held Super Summit, which was your first global virtual event. So can you talk about what was the strategy, the insight that led to hosting this thing? How did it go? What have the key learnings been?
Yeah, this is really a good extension of the previous discussion we had, because I think when I started in Supermetrics, a lot of what we were doing was bottom of funnel demand capture, either through paid advertising, particularly on Google Ads and paid search, but then also through a lot of organic content optimized for search. So SEO was a big play for us, because there's a lot of people with high intent searches. People were searching for things which had a lot of buying intent. So for example, if you are trying to build out agency budget pacing report, that's something that our technology can really help with. And if you're searching for that and you find a Supermetrics article explaining how you can do that using our technology, there's a good intent to buy. And there was a huge amount of content and terms that we could build upon. But then over time, as you're kind of growing, that's only going to get you so far, as we discussed. And we also saw a huge opportunity from our partners. So I said earlier on, Supermetrics brings marketing data from all your different marketing and advertising platforms and brings it into a lot of reporting and analytics destinations so that you can make more confident decisions, know really what's happening, and basically make your best next step using that data. So we had a lot of opportunity to partner on both the data source side and the data destination side. And we built this great company. We built this huge company, and we were seen as a market leader. We were seen as the sort of default solution in that category by many. And we felt that maybe the brand didn't reflect that. And one strategic objective we had was to elevate the brand. This was a couple of years ago. And so we started doing a lot of more collaborations with our partners. So companies like HubSpot, companies like LinkedIn, we got some of our customers from Groupon, so the American tech company. And we were doing almost monthly webinars with these great partners of ours to elevate the brand. And we were getting good results from the webinars as well in terms of awareness and engagement, but also generating some opportunities and demos as well. And we built a pretty good playbook, and we kind of got to the point where, okay, this is good. Now we need to go bigger. And we had been speaking about a flagship industry level event for some time, similar to what HubSpot had done really well around the inbound movement, but sort of focusing on the marketing and measurement space. And we had talked about Super Summit earlier, but we kind of held back. And then I think we felt this was the right time to launch that, particularly since we've had a lot of changes happening from the product side, a lot of innovations there as well. So we're excited to share what's happening. We have a unique view as a market leader to really see what's happening. We speak with so many of our customers, and it was a great chance to kind of share that narrative, share the story, and share what we think marketing measurement is going to look like in 2024 and beyond. We brought key partners in, and it just exploded. We didn't know it would be so big. We had over 8,000 people sign up. At one point, we had over 2,200 people live in a session. The chat was just going crazy. It was almost like a Twitch chat. It was funny that we were thinking, oh, it's a professional B2B conference, and people are just themselves, and it was a lot of fun. It was a great way to engage with new audiences. We had a lot of existing customers as well, a lot of existing contacts, and really kind of helped position ourselves as a company that wants to be part of the conversation around marketing measurement as we go into next year and beyond. So those, I think, were some of the key things that we wanted to do. And we also see events as a key piece of our regional playbooks as we go into next year. So as we've grown, I'd say, we were a purely global company when I joined, and we're still global, but now we have regional marketing teams. We're getting more regional in terms of, what's happening in North America is different to what's happening in Europe, which is different to what's happening in the Asia Pacific. So we see Super Summit as a brand that we can kind of have global flagship digital events, but we can also take them offline. So we're actually having our first Super Summit meetup in Sydney at the end of November this month. And that's going to be really fun to have the same brand, but as a small, more intimate meetup compared to, say, a big global summit with 8,000 people. So events will be a big play for us next year. And we kind of also wanted to kick that off at the end of this year, build a brand and kind of give ourselves the opportunity to experiment around offline and online events next year. So that was the thinking here.
Got it. And it's safe to say that this would be a demand creation type activity, and you're measuring and thinking about it accordingly.
Yeah, I think Super Summit Global was very much on the awareness piece, so really a demand creation play. And I think we can play with that. Maybe we'll have more bottom of funnel content, maybe more actionable events. And then I think as well, depending how the regional teams want to play, maybe could be even something just for customers, or there's a lot of ways we could go with it. But yeah, this specific one was more of a demand creation awareness play.
Got it. And do you think a fair kind of a generalized lesson would be that, obviously the format depends a lot on the resources and the scale and the type of audience that you're going for. But it seems like your kind of focus is, defining your category quite clearly and then figuring out what are the activities or formats that would allow us to reach that kind of thought leadership position in that category. Is that kind of what you're...
Exactly. Yeah, because I mean, we weren't focused on that when I joined, for example. It was very much on capturing as much demand as we could, whereas now in the market we're in, the plans we have from the product, that won't work. You need to sort of develop a story, develop a unique point of view, and you need to go to market and share that. And so it's a very, very different playbook than, search ads and search optimized content, for example.
Yeah, you mentioned or that kind of in the early days when you first joined, it was very much so about the product, capturing existing demand. And now it's turned more into awareness piece and kind of this, I think what you called narrative-led demand creation. So how do you go about making that transition? And I guess what I'm asking is because the product-led piece is quite numerical, right? You can look at, which campaigns are performing better along these metrics. When you start talking about narrative, it becomes a lot more subjective, and you have to take a long-term view of where you want to bring the company and the brand and how the category as a whole is going to evolve. So what was the approach that you took to kind of make that switch and to also decide on the direction that you want to take the Supermetrics brand?
Yeah, so I think you kind of reach a point where you realize we need to level up, and it might be a big change in your strategy. It might be a big change in your product roadmap. It might be a big change in who you're trying to reach. It might be a big change in terms of the competitive situation. But there's probably going to be some trigger where you reach a point where you think, like, we need to really think about this. And it might not necessarily be later on. It could be really early if you're building out a new category, if you're creating something completely new, if you're taking a new approach to solve a specific issue. You need a really strong story. And so I think that's kind of there's the point when you realize this is what we need to do. And so in terms of the measurement piece, and there is definitely a lot more uncertainty around, if we build this story, do we know it's going to fly? Is it a bit of a spend a month developing this great narrative and strategic viewpoint, and then you go out to the market and you have no idea, is it going to stick or not? So we're also pretty data led, and we're also pretty systematic in how we approach things like this. So the first thing we did was just talk to a whole host of our customers, and we spoke to a host of customers who we hadn't directly targeted, so slightly more senior in the marketing organization, and kind of wanted to understand their world and how they view things, and that really gave us the insights. So it's not necessarily something we came up with, but it's really about understanding our customers and where they see this space, and then of course our view as well, being involved in this field and having been a part of the marketing measurement space for over 10 years, we of course have a view as well, and we see where things are going. And we developed a first version of this, and we did took a lot of qualitative data. So we actually, as a marketing team, broke up, and everybody had to try and secure 5 to 10 interviews with people who would match our ideal buyer. And we'd actually pitch it. We'd go through the story. We'd say, this is what we think's happening. Does this resonate with you? We got feedback. And so we already knew when we kind of tied it together that this was based on real data. It was based on qualitative data from our ideal customers. It was based on our own insights and experience. And then it was qualified because we had already run it and gotten feedback and tweaked it. So we had a lot of confidence going into the bigger launch. But I think as well, the narrative is also something that we can develop over time. It's at a version right now that I'd say is quite early, and then that's going to evolve and develop as well as we go into next year. But we have that locked down. So I think as well, you can be quite systematic in how you develop these things, and you can check in and make sure you're on the right track, get feedback. Data is not just quantitative. It's not just numbers in spreadsheets. It's also words from people. So a good thing to keep in mind as well.
That's really good. You mentioned that there is some kind of there was some kind of trigger that made you realize, oh, we need to step up, we need to take this to the next level. Did that also apply to how you're thinking about just marketing spend, media spend in general, media channels? Or do you still have this kind of conservative, profitability first kind of mindset when it comes to spend? Or did you also start challenging maybe some of those old notions?
Yeah, I think this was what I referenced earlier, where we had discussions around, should we sacrifice a little on EBIT and invest more in growth? And this was kind of pre-downturn, this discussion. And it was very much when our CMO joined. So she joined in 2021, mid 2021, kind of late spring, early summer. So I'd already been in the company over 2.5 years at that point, and we also felt at that point, we need a CMO because we need someone who's kind of done this and can kind of show us how we can actually build this company to the size we want it to be. Because I think when I joined Supermetrics, it was one of the smallest companies I'd ever worked at. But already by that point, I think it was the biggest company I'd worked at. And now for sure, I've never worked in a company this large before. So that's quite interesting from a kind of your own personal experience. So kind of having the awareness to know that, we need someone to come in and help get us to the next level. And so that's also where we started having discussions around more of a narrative. I mean, I've always been an advocate of a strong story. Like, story is the strategy. And so to kind of have someone who could kind of drive that forward and have these discussions as well with the rest of the senior leadership team. And now we got to the point where it was time to really rethink about that and understand our unique point of view. So I'd say those were probably some of the key factors around this. And then also the discussion around where do we invest money and what trade-offs do we make around profitability and growth and so forth.
Yeah, it really does sound, and from the outside, it seems like you made a lot of those correct decisions at the correct time, which in terms of how you wanted to transform the brand and evolve it.
I think for the most part, I think we made a lot of good decisions at the right time. But that being said, I think we also made some wrong decisions as well. So, you always need to make a decision with as much data as you can. Sometimes you don't have perfect amount. You sometimes need to make a bet. But that's how it goes. I think it's the same for everybody. But I think for the most part, we made pretty good decisions at the right time.
I want to go back to another campaign or initiative that you launched in 2020, I think, your podcast. I'd be curious to learn about what was the thought process there. How do you think about, what the value, what the function of the podcast is, how you're going to measure it, and so on?
Yeah. So this was a discussion we had at that time, and we kind of felt like, we're at the point where we need to start layering things on top of what we're already doing. And I had a lot of success with podcasts. Previously, I know a lot of companies in the B2B space had a lot of success with podcasts. And we found that there were some good podcasts around digital analytics, and there are obviously a lot of podcasts around marketing. And we wanted to take that space of having a show where we could talk about analytics and data from the marketing perspective. And so the marketing analytics show was born. This was also in the sort of early days of the pandemic, and we actually saw that people were listening to a lot of podcasts. We thought maybe people aren't going to listen to podcasts because no one's commuting to work, but there's also people that really have much to do. So people were reading books and they were listening to podcasts. They were knitting, they were painting, and so forth. And I had seen that in the other podcast I was running at that time. And so we thought it was a good chance to get into that space. And I think our approach was actually a little off looking back. I think that it was good that we did it, but we tried to make it an extension of our existing content strategy, which at that point was very product-led. So a lot of feedback we often had, and this is probably biased feedback because we were speaking to a lot of practitioners, is that they wanted content to be actionable and really show you how to do things. Don't just talk high level, but really show. And so I said, like, a lot of our content was how-to tutorial based type. It was giving a solution to a problem people knew that they had, and serving up Supermetrics is one way you could solve that. And some of the episodes were maybe a little bit too how-to actionable, which I think would work well in a blog format or a video format. But at the same time, we had a lot of really good episodes early on. I think our very first episode was how marketers can think like analysts. So we had a data analyst come in and talk about their world and how marketers can take that kind of analytical, systematic thinking. We had some on data-led storytelling, so how you can tell a story with your data, and different frameworks as well. So we found we were sort of experimenting with it as well, and we could kind of see which episodes worked. And it was very sort of guest-centric in that we were bringing experts from the outside and hearing their views, and we were then kind of repurposing that across email. We were creating content out of it as well. And over time, we built a good base, and now when we're bringing the narrative, it's great that we did that, because podcast is a huge channel that is going to be super good for exactly this sort of more narrative-led marketing, when you have this unique point of view as we're kind of shifting the strategy, as you're trying to go higher in the organization, bringing your thought leadership into play. And so what we've done is that we actually flipped the name from the Marketing Analytics Show to the Marketing Intelligence Show, which is sort of the space that we realize we're operating in that it's not just analyzing data, but it's also using that to make better decisions, to basically use data to power your next step, to really have a good understanding of what's going on, enabling marketing leadership to talk to their CFO, have a seat at the board table, show that marketing is really impacting revenue and not just the arts and crafts department. And so that's marketing intelligence, and that's the space we're playing in. And what we've done is that we're now actually having the majority of episodes with our internal experts. So we have our CMO has been on several episodes. We've had members from the marketing team talking about how we use data. We have our members from our solutions engineering team who are really, working with customers and digging into topics that are relevant to them and sharing our view. So it's a great way to align the narrative, our unique point of view, and bring that into market. And of course, we come back to measurement as well, and you can kind of see how that podcast has grown over time. I think it's a good leading indicator of, are people interested in your content? Are you reaching the right audiences? Because I think there's a certain amount of people who would listen to a 45-minute podcast episode about marketing data governance frameworks. But my assumption is that if anyone's listening to that, they're probably a good fit potential customer for us, or maybe an existing customer. And then the other thing is just qualitative feedback again. So during Super Summit, at the very end of the event, we had a kind of virtual lounge where we had some people dropping in. We had a Q&A with our CMO, and the first person who kind of joined that and was speaking was saying, "Hey, I found you through the podcast. I was listening to one of your recent episodes. It was so good. It helped me with the problem I had. I then started listening to a bunch of other episodes, and I found your content. Now I'm here. I'm looking at your products." So you hear these things, and you kind of pick up on them that this works, and that's how a podcast works, and that's exactly what worked back in my agency days when I launched another podcast around B2B SaaS marketing. So that's kind of what we were thinking at the time. So and that's how it's evolved over time as well, and how we see it now. So it's a good decision that we made. Maybe we approached it slightly the wrong way, but that being said, I think it was great we did it, and now we have another platform we can lean into now.
Thanks for going through that kind of how it evolved, and as you said, I mean, even if you maybe have launched it with a slightly different focus that you have now, it's still the fact that you launched it and were able to evolve it is what matters. And I also love that unprompted qualitative feedback is so valuable when we're talking about that demand creation. It's not, you can't easily measure or track it, but I think it's a hugely valuable signal when there's so much data and information out there, and someone comes and tells you like, "Oh, I really appreciate what you did here, and I listened to it and it impacted me." That's a hugely valuable signal. We're running short on time, but I'd love to ask you just a couple of rapid fire questions.
Yeah.
One you wrote in a recent LinkedIn post, quote, "Stop launching new marketing campaigns," end quote. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, I think it was stop launching new marketing campaigns and start analyzing your existing ones. So I think this was more about making sure that when you launch a campaign, that's when the work is done. That's really when the work starts, I think, when you launch. So look at performance, look at data over time, see how it's trending, look at efficiency, look at results, depending what you're trying to achieve with that specific campaign. And I think there's a lot you can squeeze out of optimizing and modifying your existing campaigns, maybe even more than if you put the same amount of work in launching something new. So of course you want to bring out new campaigns and ensure that there's new messages and new stories coming out. But I think as well, optimizing, modifying, renewing creative of existing campaigns, there's a lot you can get. So that was my take on that one.
I think it's a really good reminder. Another good reminder, here's another quote from Post. Quote, as a marketer, sometimes your job is to just hype the shit out of something internally within your company. What was it that prompted you to have that realization?
Yeah, this is also something we spoke about a lot back in my agency days. And if you remember the company Drift, when they kind of brought out the sort of alternative to the forms as a conversion point, and they made everything more conversational. They spoke a lot about internal marketing, and we picked up on that. They were one of our customers. We worked with Dave Gerhardt and their team back in the day. And a key audience for your marketing is not just people outside your company on the market, but it's everybody inside your company. So you need to firstly align everyone internally on what you're talking about, what the new narrative, what the new strategy is. What does this mean for the sales team? Obviously aligning it closely with product. But then you also need to talk about why you're making these moves. So most people aren't marketers inside a company, and to us, it makes a lot of sense that, we need to shift from bottom of funnel playbooks, demand capture, to layering demand creation on top. We need to reach the 95%. We need to make sure we're building out Q1's pipeline already now. And you need to educate people internally on that. And when you're doing something, let's take Super Summit as an example, where you have your first big global digital flagship event, you're trying to generate, over 5 to 10K attendees. You want 2,000 people live online, all talking about marketing analytics, and you need to hype that up internally. And I think marketing is really about momentum. A big part of that is that you're out there, you're often the first touch with most prospects who kind of enter your, I don't want to use the word funnel, but that sort of buying journey. And you need to build momentum within the market, but also within the company. I think marketing can be a great catalyst for action, for enthusiasm, for motivation. And I think a lot of really good marketers that I admire, they create that buzz, yes, within their market and within their prospective customer base and so forth, but they also do it internally as well. So I think it's a huge untapped opportunity, particularly as you grow, that, if you're a marketing team of 5, but you work in a company of 100 people, you could all of a sudden scale the marketing team from 5 to 100 if you can get everyone on board and excited. So that's my spin on that one.
That's a good kind of framing shift, perspective shift. Okay, Edward, last question. There's a lot of talk, maybe not as much as it used to be, but still a lot of talk about data-driven marketing, quote unquote. Supermetrics probably processes more marketing data than any company in the world. And so you're kind of right in the middle of it. And you've given a lot of good examples of how you've internally used data, qualitative and quantitative, to inform your decisions. But I'd be curious to know, is there anything you see in terms of common mistakes or ways that this so-called data-driven marketing is being misused, abused, or misunderstood?
Yeah, I think there's a couple. I think the first thing, if you're relying on your data and you're making decisions based on data, which you should, the first thing you need to do is ensure that the data is reliable. I think often a risk or a trap you might fall into is that you're making decisions based on inaccurate data. And I spoke earlier about someone wanting to listen to a 45-minute podcast about marketing data governance frameworks. Well, I think most marketing problems can be related back to marketing data governance problems. This is something one of my colleagues from our solutions engineering team, Evan, said when we were just having a kind of informal chat, and it really stuck out at me. And I was like, whoa, what do you mean by this? And we kind of opened that up, and then I got him on the podcast and was like, we're going to do a 45-minute discussion about this. And really, marketing data governance is ensuring the data you have within the marketing team is accurate, it's high quality, it's secure, people can access it. And so we look at marketing data governance from 3 angles. Firstly, it's data access. So making sure the right people in your organization have access to the right data they need to do their job. There's data quality. So organizing your data, naming conventions, media taxonomy, tagging infrastructure, ensuring you can link it to suitable campaigns. We say in Supermetrics, well, it depends who you ask how they say it, but basically shit in, shit out. If you get shit in terms of data, you're going to get shit out in terms of the decisions you make, the actions you take. So data quality is one of the key pillars of marketing data governance, in my opinion. And then data security, just making sure you have a secure way to collect, process, store your data. Obviously, privacy compliance are much more at the focus point now than they used to be, which is good because I think it used to be a bit of a wild west in the early days of the internet. It was like, just do what you want. So great that we have that. So I think that's the first thing, that just make sure that you have good data. And then I think as well, we often speak about paralysis by analysis, where you just overanalyze, you maybe get too deep into it. I think it's about getting to the point where you have enough confidence to make a decision. And when you've reached that point, then you can move on. So I think that's what data-driven means to me. I think another thing is also thinking about not just being driven by your data, but also you need to make sure you're driven by your customer, and you need to be driven by your business objectives and where your organization is going. So I think of it, when you speak about being data-driven, I think some marketers use it as a badge of honor. And for sure, you need to be using your data. You need to be leaning on your data, but also remember you have your customer and your business that you need to be driven by as well. So I think those are some good practices when it comes to how you actually work with your data.
Really good takeaways. Edvard, it's been a pleasure to have you on. Thank you so much. Obviously, people should definitely go check out, if our customers or listeners are not familiar with Supermetrics, check out either podcast or upcoming events or just the website. If people want to connect with you and listen, hear more from you, I think LinkedIn is probably the best.
Yeah, LinkedIn is definitely the best place. So if you want to connect, follow up, go check me out on LinkedIn. I'm pretty active there as well, as you can see with my hot takes. So
yeah, hopefully there'll be more of those coming. We'll put a link to your personal LinkedIn in the show notes. Like I said, thank you so much for coming on, and have a great rest of the day.
Thanks so much for having me. This was awesome.
Thank you for listening. You can find all episodes of The Growth Pod on Spotify, YouTube, and Apple Podcasts.